This video today we talk about sources for study of medieval India. Study of medieval India 700 to 1750 History Social Science Standard 7 Medieval India. Now we divide the Indian history into three portions for the convenience of studying. The period before 700 is called 700 CD, CE or AD. AD is Anno Domini, CE is Common Empire. The period before 700 is called Ancient History, the Harappan or the Indus Valley Civilization period we can say, and then 700 to 1750 is called medieval history. 1750 is the time from when we have the European powers coming and settling in India and colonizing, and companies starting doing administration of the Indian continent, and thereafter we would call that as a modern history. Sometimes we use the Mughal Empire also as a part of modern history. Sometimes we treat Mughal Empire as a part of medieval history. Now, to study history, we have seen that when we studied about the Harappan or Mohenjo-daro civilization, that we look at the seals, we look at the drawings, we look at the cave paintings, we look at the carvings, we look at the inscriptions. So, like that, there are many different sources for us to understand. The people who lived there, along with the king and queen, used to talk about the eulogies, the prasastis of the kings and queens. Then, when a warrior wins a war, they used to sing praises about the chieftain or the military commanders. When some rich peasant or a rich trader gives us some philanthropy, they used to talk praises about that. But sometimes we never have stories about the poor people also. Okay. Now, history, different people tell different history. A person who is writing history on behalf of or closer to a king will talk plus points about that king and minus points about the other kings. He will not talk about the minus point of his own king, or he will be afraid to talk about the plus points of other kings, even though it exists. So, we may not have the full truth. You will have some partial truth. So, that is one thing. Second is when people were writing, people were copying because paper was not there. People used to wash the paper and reuse the paper for some time. Before that, it was palm leaf. Before that, it was clay tablet. Before that, it was inscription on these stones. So, people used to write in different things. Later only you had a copper plate, and then when people started writing on copper plate used to be on the shape of a palm leaf, and then so many copper plates were strung together in a and locked, so that all these things are together, it will form a book. So like this. Now history is also sometimes oral, sometimes written. Not everything is written down. Most of the things are spoken and handed over by generation. So when it comes from one person to another, it will get lost. That means distortion. That means noise will get added. So the real intention might not be known. Also, when the scribes are copying the history, their handwritings are different, or the cursive writing versus normal writing, and the Sanskrit versus Prakrit, and then in the Dravidian languages versus North Indian languages. All these also created differences in the way history was recorded. That is why we have hundreds of Ramayanas and then 1,000 different stories which are part of or not part of Mahabharata. All this happened because over a period of time, when people convert verbal information to written information, or when people started copying, or when some people hear something and write something, or when some person copies from one book to another, lot of things undergo change. Sometimes destruction and disruption also goes on. Distortion is done when one king takes over another and changes the history. Destruction happens when one type of kingdom wins over the other and destroys everything that was existing there. And then we know about the Ghazni doing 17 raids. So when he plundered the temples, he destroyed so many other things. So many times we might have lost a lot of things. And then when Muhammad Ghori established an empire and slave dynasty started ruling India, distortion would have happened to change the way life was in the country. So we don't know. So historians have to study hundreds of thousands of different sources and see potentially which could be more truer to the actuals. And then understand what happened. Because when you look at the chronicles, if you are a courtier of a king, then there will be hyperbolic exaggeration. That means what? If you had won one war, they will write you have won 100 war. So that is the problem with the chronicles. But at the same time, if you are looking at what travelers are writing, the travelers will write little bit good about something if they get something from that king. But at the same time, they are going to different places and they will go away and they need not be afraid of this king. So they will talk more truth. For example, Marco Polo talks about the Kyle port in the Pandyan kingdom. He talks that thousands of horses were brought, There were the ports were always full. The Arab traders were there, and things like that. Ibn Battuta of Morocco says the Muhammad bin Tughlaq's kingdom was not so great because he was appointing slaves as the governor. So these chronicles by the travelers are very helpful. Now we know in 712 when first time the caliphate general was able to subdue Sindh, from that time onwards travelers from the Arab world were coming to India and exchanging the culture. So the travel logs are, lot of them are available to us. Now there are some are primary sources of history, some are secondary sources of history. So that also the difference we need to understand when we try to understand the history. Now there was a king called Aurangzeb in the Mughal dynasty. What is Mughal dynasty? Established by Babur, right? Now that historian is saying that it's a duty of the historian to be faithful, to have no hope for profit, no fear of injury, show no partiality to either side, no animosity to either, to show no difference between a friend and a stranger, and to write nothing but with sincerity. This is written by Kafi Khan. So even in those days, historians knew what to write. But this is the Mughal dynasty. Mughal dynasty was just before the British, when Babur established the Mughal dynasty. Before that, what all happened, historians may not have this much sincerity. Even if they have had, we will not know what prompted them to write in a particular fashion. So we have to be careful about the inscriptions, careful about the manuscripts, careful about so many things. Now, inscriptions are carved out on flat stones or on the walls or on some other places. So sometimes it's on the rock, sometimes it's on the stone, sometimes it's a temple rock, sometimes it's a Vijaya Stambh or the Sarnath pillar types. Sometimes it is written on metals and stored in the archives. There are, what is written here? Mostly it is written about the royal decrees, the dedications, to whom it is given, why it is given, when it was given, where it was given, commemorations, after which victory or after which event somebody had a son, somebody got married. So all those events were recorded. It was also a record of donations and memorials. After a king passes away, they write about him in this, maybe the tomb of Itumesh types, or records of donations. This was given away by this king to this temple or this university for this purpose, etc. This were written. Now the vocabulary were also changing, and different parts they had different vocabulary for different purposes, and from that we try to learn a lot about the culture. For example, if you look at Chola period, you will find something called Velan Vagai, which is the land meant for Velan, Velalar, Velan Mai, that means agriculture, Velan Vagai. Then this is a non-Brahmin proprietors. Then Brahmadeya is a Brahmin proprietors. Then lands given to Brahmin was called Shalabhoga. And then there was a land given to school or temple, that is Devadana. Then you had a Pallichandam. Pallichandam is a land given to Jain institutions. So like that, they had different words. That is one thing that we learned. Second is they thought about it and named. And the third thing is there was a Jain institution encouraged or patronized at the same time when a normal school is patronized, a normal institution or a temple is patronized. So you had a Brahmadeya also, you had a Devadana also, you had a Palichandam also at the same time. That means what? Tolerance was there, or maybe so many things we can learn from these vocabulary, from these inscriptions. Now temples, palaces, mosques, tombs, minars, forts, or everything are monuments, collectively known as monuments. Each of these monuments are a rich repository of information for the historians to understand the past. Then comes the coin. For example, you will find that Rudrama Devi, when she was ruling, she was dressing as a man, acting like a man, and she was able to rule. Rudrama Devi, she was a lady. She was adopted by her father because they had no sons or no children. But still, she cannot act as a lady, she has to act as a man because only then they will accept her as a ruler, Rudrama Devi. Her coins, she did not put her figure. At the same time, there was another king called, a lady ruler called Rasia Sultana. She was a daughter of Itumish. She was proud in telling everybody, I am daughter of Itumish. She put her picture in the coins, right? And so everybody knew, oh, this is a lady, oh, she is our king. No, no, lady cannot be our king. It has to be a male, only then they will be strong. So there was a prejudice against the women, and Rasia Sultana was not able to overcome that. She was overthrown in 4 years, but Rudrama Devi ruled for 10-15 years. So from the coins also we come to know about so many information. Architecture, Indo-Sarkanic architecture we are saying, so that the building will be Persian, but the paintings and the walls and the designs will be Indian. the Muslims brought a Islamic concept of the architecture. So if you look at the fort or the mosque or the palace built by the Islamic rulers, they are different from the forts or the palaces built by the Chauhans or the Rashtrakutas or the Palas or whatever. Palas, we know about how Buddhism and the politics were so closely interlinked that the first king Gopala was not a king by birth but elected by the people because he was so nice and good. Vaishali is a kingdom where it was ruled by a council and not by an individual. That is a true cradle of democracy. All these things we learned from inscriptions, from the coins, from the temples, from the walls of the palaces and forts. Now, there are inscriptions on the arches, on the domes, on the minarets of the Delhi Sultanate. These are mostly religious. Many of these also have lines from the Quran, inscription on the arches, domes, and minarets. Now, Khajuraho monuments, they are the temples in Madhya Pradesh. Khajuraho have beautiful sculptures. Then the temples in Konark, they are so specially scientifically, mathematically, astronomically built that it is called sun temple, and sun will fall on certain places inside the temple only on certain days of the year, which means that they know when solstice will happen, when equinox will happen, what is Uttarayana and Dakshinayana, or the movement of the sun, Apogee, Perigee, and all those things they knew possibly. That is why they were able to design and build it in that fashion. Dilwara in Mount Abu is a Jain temple. Today in Mount Abu you have the Brahma Kumari's headquarters. Mount Abu was patronized by the Chauhans for a long time. These constitute valuable sources for us to understand the religion-centered cultural evolution. Then you have the temples of the south, the Tanjavur Brihadeshwara temple, the Gangakonda Cholapuram temple, the Dharasuram temple, or look at the Madurai temple where you will find the square form of settlement, and they will find that it is expanding as Gopurams and Mandapams on all sides as the cities start growing. Then you have the Vitala temple, Virupaksha temple, and the Hampi. It talks about the Vijayanagara rulers. So we can learn about the Chola rulers or the Pandya kings or the Vijayanagara rulers from these temples, from these inscriptions, from these mosques. Now, Kabatul Islam Masjid. Kabatul Islam Masjid is most famous building because that is the oldest mosque in India. Kabatul Islam. So during the Iltutmish period only it got completed, but it was started to be built even before that. Juma Masjid. Juma Masjid in Delhi is the largest mosque in India, and it is one of the top 10 mosques in the world from this size. Juma Masjid. Juma means congregational prayer, where Friday or on special days all the Muslims of the town congregate there. Fatehpur Sikri Dargah is very famous. So all this is the importance given to religion and the collective prayer. Why collective prayer is important? Because when you come together and pray based on your common belief and belongingness, the brotherhood, the togetherness will grow. Then the forts of historical importance are there. For example, Agra Fort, the Chittor Fort of the Ranas or the Rajputs, the Gwalior Fort, which is very strong even today, the Delhi Red Fort for their architecture, for the stones, for the quality of in which it is built. Or look at Daulatabad. Daulatabad came from where? Daulatabad came from Devagiri. Devagiri, why? Because Tughlaq captured and converted it into capital. And then look at Firoz Shah. Firoz Shah was a nice and peaceful king, but he built something called Firoz Shah Kotla in Delhi. So all these things are sources of information to study about the type of people, the type of rulers, and the type of art, craft, architecture, engineering that they had in mind in those days. Palaces of Jaipur, Jaisalmer, Jodhpur, they have beautiful lakes inside. They have beautiful gardens. They are built on rugged hills and mountains. Then comes the Qutub Minar or Alai Darwaza or the tombs of Iltutmish and Balban are infirmity. Likewise, the city is in ruin. For example, Delhi was almost lost because of the Tughlaq's movement to Devagiri. So city is in ruins, Old Delhi and New Delhi, or Delhi getting converted into a garrison town, or a garrison town being created near Delhi but not in Delhi itself. What Alauddin Khilji did, what he did is he created a Fatehpur, Sirsa, right? And then you have the Hampi or Firozabad or Tughlaqabad. These cities are today now ghost towns. Only some broken buildings exist. So all these teach us or give us a wealth of information for us to understand and appreciate the medieval history. Coins. From coins, what do we learn? From coins, we learn the titles of the people, the portraits of the kings and queens, how they look like or what it was written, the events that happened, when the coin was issued after winning the certain war, at which place it was issued, on which date, what was the season or what was the occasion on which it was issued, the year in which Marco Polo came types. Then which dynasty issued it? Is it a Chola or a Pandya dynasty? What were the logos that were used in those days? Is it the fish or is it the lion or is it the tiger? Things like that. Metallic composition. Is it copper? Is it gold? Is it silver? For example, Tughlaq had to introduce a copper coin. It is called a cheap representative coin to replace the original gold and silver token currency. Now, coins were also issued for celebrating or commemorating the achievements, maybe military conquests, territorial expansions, or a new trade link. Then Gori had a gold Lakshmi coin. So this tells us that the concept of Lakshmi which was in India was adopted by Gori and they issued a coin and it was in gold. So we learn a lot of things. Copper jitals were there, silver tankas were there. Then Mohammed bin Tughlaq brought in the copper token currency, copper jitals, silver tankas. What is a jital? The calculation was also there in those days. A jital contained 3.6 grain of silver. 48 jital is equal to 1 silver tanka. So this is how the tanka got converted into jital. And jital will have how much silver? Though it is a copper jital, it will have a silver. All those information we get to learn. Literature was also political, secular or devotional. For example, the Bhakti movement gave rise to a lot of literature. Not only that, the Cholas promoted the literature. They patronized the writers. The Pandya kingdom was a home for the Sangam literature, the confluence of the literary people where they discussed and debated the poetry, prose and drama written by others. So the Kambaramayanam, Sekidar Periya Puranam, Nalayira Divya Prabandham, all those were composed. There were 12 Alvars. Alvars were followers of Vishnu, Vaishnavism, Vaishnavites. And then we had Nayanmar. Nayanmar were the followers of Shiva, Saivites. So they had the Nayanmars had wrote, which was composed or which was collected and given a name called Tirumarai. Then there was a Nadamuni Devaram. Then Appar Sambandar Sundarar. These were called the trio. Appar, Tirinyana Sambandar and Sundarar, the trio. And then Nambi Andar Nambi. He combined it into Tirumarai. Then Manika Vashagar wrote Tiruvashagam. Manika Vashagar was also a minister. They were all scripted during the Chola or the Pandya times. We also have history that the minister was able to convert the Pandyan from Jaina to Saivism back and then he killed lots of Jains and he was titled as Kun Pandyan, the one who let the blood fall out by killing. Right? Then Jayadeva's Gita Govindam was followed up with the Bhakti movement. Bhakti movement started in South India, we can say, because more literature on the Bhakti period was found from the South India. In 15th century, Kabir Das was also a person who picked up from the Bhakti movement and gave rise to or authored many literary works on devotional side. On the secular side, insight into the events and individuals were also found. Madhura Vijayam, Amukta Malyada were the poems composed by Ganga Devi and Krishna Devaraya. So that means the king were also able to write poem. They were patronizing poets and Vijayanagar Empire was known for literary works. All this we can learn from this. Madhura Vijayam and Mukta Malyada. Chand Bardai. Chand Bardai, what did we learn from Chand Bardai about the story of Prithviraj Chauhans and the princess of Kannauj? Swayamvara. It's a Rajput king's valor. Now, what happened during the Turkish invasion of India? We don't have much stories. This is where we say destruction or distortion could have happened. That is one. And second is, it is not that the stories are written only about rich and the powerful and about the winning and then annexing. Stories were also written about the poor people. For example, in Periya Puranam, there is a story about a poor landless woman near her hut going to work and coming back, and then her child is tied on a piece of cloth which is tied to a branch of a tree where only breeze is the company for them, and they were trying to cook something in the evening after the salary she gets, which is called the Kej and male varam, we know, right? The Ujukudi who have only, and the Velalar, the people who put in menial labor. So those type of people, how they lived, what they did, what song she was singing to make her child sleep when she is trying to cook in the evening after work. So we know people used to work, people don't have a hut, people has to live in the open, all those things we come to know. So certain literature was also there about the ordinary simple people, people so called of lower secular strata, people of the lower economic strata, people had no power, no position. About them also there was literature. And for the pre-Islamic literature, what we have discovered is only Kalhana's Rajatarangini. Only this we have about the pre-Islamic literature. Rest of the literature, most of the thing that we found is from the northern India. It is mostly Islamic period only, right? But then there were secular literatures and we have little information about the Turkish invasion. That is one small minus point. Then there were so many books that were written. Books can be books for the sake of books, or maybe non-fiction or fiction, or biography and autobiography. Biography and autobiography, the problem is when you write a story about yourself, or when you ask somebody to write a story about yourself, it will be in favor of you and they will not tell any minus point or black marks about you. That is a problem. But still, we have books like Tabaqat-i Nasiri, Minhaj al-Siraj. Minhaj al-Siraj or al-Siraj. Minhaj al-Siraj is a very famous chronicler. He had written a lot from which we learn a lot about history. He was there during the period of Razia Sultana also. And though he recognizes Razia Sultana as the most capable leader of the times, he was not able to keep her as the king, and he worked along with other nobles who ultimately ousted her and murdered her. So, Minhaj al-Siraj wrote a lot of books, which includes Sabakati Nasiri. Then, Sultan Nasruddin Muhammad of Saleh dynasty. Mostly he wrote about Sultan Nasruddin Muhammad of the slave dynasty. It talks about the conquest of Muhammad Ghori. It also talks about the conquest of Muhammad Ghori. Then you have Tajul Masir. Tajul Masir is written by Nizami. He was a migrant from Ghazni. He wrote about Iltutmish's rule and about Qutbuddin Aibak. So after Qutbuddin Aibak, you have Iltutmish. After Iltutmish, you have Razia Sultana. And during this period, you have Hasan Nizami's books and Minhaj Siraj's books to talk about. That is why we know so much about this slave dynasty. Then Tariq-i-Firoz Shahi is there. Tariq-i-Firoz Shahi. Tariq is a book, a record, a chronology, a history, a date-wise event. Everything is Tariq. Tariq is a historical record. Tariq-i-Firoz Shahi is about Firoz Shah. Who was Firoz Shah? Ghiyasuddin Balban to Firoz Shah. Firoz Shah is the one who built the Firoz Shah Kotla. So Firoz Shah and Balban's story. About the Balban dynasty we learn from Ziadur Barni. Ziadur Barni, he was a courtier of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Right? So Tariq-i-Firoz Shahi we have. Then we have Tariq-i-Frishta. Tariq-i-Frishta we got from 16th century. It talks about the Mughal power. What is Mughal power? Mughal power is after Babur came to power. Right? Then we have a Babar Nama. Babar Nama is a story of Babur. Abul Fasal Zaini Akbari. Aini Akbari is written by Abul Fasal, but because it was written for Akbar, we will not be able to take it fully, but still it is closer to truth. Then we have about Turkiya Jahangiri written by Jahangir, and then Tabaqat Akbari. All these books we have. Then we have the important book called Tariq-i-Badwani. Tariq-i-Badwani is also an independent chronology. Now, what is Tabaqat? Tabaqat is generation or century. Tabaqat is generation or century. So, Tabaqat-i Nasri is generation or century of the Nasruddin Mahmud, Sultan Nasruddin. That is what Minhaj Siraj wrote. Then Tusk. Tusk is story of a person. Tusk is a story of a person. Then Tariq or Tahqiq. Tariq or Tahqiq is record or event or history. So, these are the Persian or Islamic or Arabic words used by those biographers or chroniclers. Let us look at the travelers and travelogues. Marco Polo is a very famous person, famous not because of all the things that he did, but also because he gave Indians a lot of scope to learn about India. What Indians did not know about India, we came to know only after his writing, because he traveled far and wide, he recorded, and he spread whatever he recorded to others. Marco Polo is a Venetian traveler. He came from Europe. He visited when Pandya kingdom was at its peak in the 13th century. He visited twice. He came to Kayal. Kayal is a port in Thoothukudi. Kayal is a port near Thoothukudi. Kayal was famous not only for the sea trade but also for the pearl fisheries. So he said ships from Arabia and China traded here, horses were imported, the port was always full, and the traders were happy. Marco Polo said this. He came around 1253 or something like that. Now Al-Biruni is very famous because he wrote the story of the Muhammad Ghazni's campaign. Al-Biruni. What did he say? Not only he wrote the Ghazni story, he stayed back and he studied Indian culture. When Ghazni came 17 times, Al-Biruni came along with Ghazni, but did not go back. He stayed back to study the Indian culture. He covered the Somanath expedition. That is why we know that Ghazni plundered Somanath temple and took away a lot of loot. That was almost his last campaign to India, the 17th campaign almost. Biruni learned Sanskrit so that he will better understand the literature and culture of India. He wanted to understand the locals more. He wrote Tahqiq-i-Hind. Tahqiq is the history. We have seen Tahqiq or Tariq is the history or the record. Tahqiq-i-Hind means about Hind, about India. Now this Hind or Hindustan is not same as the Hindustan we have today or the India we have today. The word Hindustan had gone through multiple meanings, multiple connotations, multiple interpretations, multiple usage over a period of time. It never ever meant the Indian subcontinent. It never ever included the southern peninsula. It was the area that was ruled by maybe the Delhi Sultanate at a different points of time, which could be called as Hindustan. That was an area to the south of Indus. That only that much it meant. So the social, educational, religious, economic conditions was discussed in the Sahih-e-Hind, written by Al-Biruni, who came along with Muhammad Ghazni. Then we have the famous Ibn Batwa. Ibn Batwa wrote something called Rihla. He was a Moroccan scholar. What did he write? He came from North Africa via Egypt, via Central Asia to India. So he knows the different things that are happening in the Ghaznibad or the Turkish Empire or the caliphates in Central India, right? About the Mongols and things like that. Now he says Egypt was rich. He says India had caste and sadi practice. Ibn Batwa from Morocco is coming and telling that India had caste system and sadi practiced. He said India traded with the West. West is what? Europe. How? Through the Arabs, traders, or through the ports. He said Delhi was a magnificent city. And he speaks about the capital transfer from Delhi to Devagiri by Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So Ibn Batwa's record, a Moroccan scholar's record about India is also very informative. Also, the glory of the Vijayanagar was recorded by the travelers and travelogues. How? There was an Italian who came, Niccolo Conti. Niccolo Conti came very late in 1420. And then Abdul Razak came to the court of Great Khan in 1443, 1420, 1443. The Domingo Pais, Portuguese traveler, came in 1522. So 1420, 1443, 1522 also, so many other travelers came to India, and from their records, travelogues, we come to know a lot about the medieval history of those times. So there are different sources for us to learn about the medieval history. It could be inscriptions, it could be monuments, it could be forts or palaces, it could be religious books, it could be secular books, it could be biographies, it could be autobiography itself, or it could be travel logs. So this is what we study about the sources for study for medieval India